may remember the Arab Spring. This is, where all these rights were going to come in and everyone was going to be treated equally, and there was going to be democracy in the Middle East. Basically started in Egypt, then they got the Muslim Brotherhood, then they overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood, but we don't call that a coup because we kind of like the guys that were sort of in the first place. Anyway, well, a new study has come out, and Egypt, which led this thing, which once was the heart of the entire Middle East, that yes, Egypt is the worst country in the Middle East for women. Let's take a look. So yeah, the worst five Arab countries for women: Egypt, Iraq, which probably has a little something to do with us, Saudi Arabia, which we did a story on 2 weeks ago, that women still cannot drive there. They'll be able to vote in a couple years, but I guess they won't be able to drive to the polling stations. Syria, no surprise there, and Yemen. So let's just start with this. Yemen, the word men is in there. What?
I feel like there should be a funny BuzzFeed article somewhere in here where it's like top 10 outrageous things you wouldn't see, and it's just all these photos. I don't know, the picture that was just in the back, which just reminded me of a bad BuzzFeed parody article. Because you just know all these countries are going to have terrible policies against women. You know that these countries are all in such flux and their governments are crumbling constantly. So it's almost like now a parody. Like, what do you expect?
Right, and you don't expect more. So the last couple weeks here on the show, we've been doing these kind of things. Like a couple weeks ago, it came out that Kuwait is using a system of gaydar, I kid you not, to keep gay people out of Kuwait.
We don't the gaydar technology, but aside from that, no surprises there.
No, like, is it just one gay guy at the door, like, oh, he's gay, get him? Right. So, okay, so we have gay. So gays obviously not treated well in the Middle East as a general rule, right? So then, if we also have Saudi Arabia is one of our biggest allies, although we're having some issues with them, and women are not treated equally there. Now Egypt, which I'm not sure where our alliance is right at this moment, but we have all these countries that don't even have the sort of basic human rights. Not everyone has to be treated great, not everyone's treated great here, but should we have just basic human, your women have to be just relatively equal? Is that
you walk through the town square, you shouldn't expect to be penetrated, which it actually said in this article that 90% of the women who've walked through the main town square have at some point had clothing ripped off them or have been penetrated, and then it went to say some of them were even raped. So they're not even including
during the uprising in Tahrir Square.
I mean, 99% of women have said they've experienced sexual harassment, and not just like whistling from construction workers, like harassment.
I think that's
so. But half the people watching this will say the U.S. has no right to tell anyone what to do, and we don't treat our people that great, and blah blah. And I think that's legit. And clearly, the way our foreign policy is, we're getting out of all these places.
You walk down Main Street, USA, without the expectation of being sexually assaulted.
Yeah, I mean, women are still seen as second-class citizens in this country. So I mean, it's an uphill battle for women all the time. But I mean, these are cultures that are ancient cultures that have never moved through the age of enlightenment. I mean, there's no sense of that part of the evolution. The human rights of man is not a conversation they've had in their culture yet. So this is, ancient cultures, and this is how they, women are absolutely second-class citizens, just to start with. And so, but we've been doing this for hundreds of years. Our policy is, you're an important resource for us, whether militarily or oil or whatever it is. So we'll look the other way. And
but then do you help them? Okay, so that's interesting when you said, I never thought of it that way, that they're not at the stage of enlightenment. Like maybe they're basically on survival and food and shelter. If you look at like Maslow's pyramid and you look at people's needs moving up it, that's a good point, because it seems like they're still at food, water, shelter, stability, all those things.
But they're more like they're tribal cultures. I mean, the Mideast is a tribal culture, and tribal cultures are not even, it's not about a democracy, and tribal cultures, women for the most part are, treated as servants.
Do we care, now that we're a global village and we have access to this information, know people are suffering, is it up to us now to go there and help them with these basic needs so they can move
that's
towards
the part that I think is particularly interesting.
That never ever works. What works is the people in Tahrir Square who originally did this uprising are people who were educated in the West, who are younger generations, who are attached to the global village through the internet, and do have a different point of view, and they were trying to bring some new energy into their country. Unfortunately, they didn't have the political stability or foundation. And when you take a dictator away from these tribal cultures, look at Iraq, you take a dictator away, the tribes go crazy, and they go back 500 years, basically, is what happens. And so when you take the kind of the oppressive forces off of a culture like that, chaos ensues. And when chaos ensues, women are victimized.
Yeah, and Egypt is the perfect example of that, because for 30 years they had a dictator who gave women basically no rights. Then they tried democracy, and it got worse for a year, and then they revolted against the democracy, and now they have the same military that was
the Mubarak,
right. And not only that, but it is worse now, because even Bassem Youssef, who's the Jon Stewart of Egypt, he's now been taken off the air. He at least was on air.
It's terrifying.
Right. See, that's what when we're talking about, okay, understanding that these are tribal cultures and that they're going to, when they're in chaos and when they don't know what to do, we're going to revert back there, and that they have to find their own infrastructure and we can't help them. I disagree, because our government is still aiding these other governments that are now taking journalists and people basically and taking them away from the people. So if they can't ever have an uprising, if they can't have women speaking out to protect themselves because their government is being empowered and funded by people like the US, the UK, anyone else who's giving them money, then we are indirectly in some way still influencing them. So if we can fund them, we should help save them, or not fund them at all and not save them, just completely leave it alone, but you can't do both.
But doesn't this go to the fundamental difference between, we want people to have rights. So let's say as the United States, we'd like women to have equal rights, but we also want Saudi Arabia's oil. So we're constantly negotiating, how do we do with that? Or even in Egypt right now, we'd like them to have more rights, but can we say to these guys who just came into power again after a not coup, can we say, well, guys, you're really otherwise, because we're already taking some of the money away.
But this is the nature of politics. Politics is compromise, and it has been since day one. Men have been trading things to influence and power, and you compromise with your enemy. Your enemy's enemy becomes your friend, and all of that. And it's very, very complicated. It's not black and white, and we're not all going to stay on our borders and be isolationists and say we're not playing with anybody. So, unfortunately, we have to go out in the world and play and make these compromises, and it's horrific and it's not fair, and whoever said life was going to be fair on this planet, that's the other thing. But you think about our democracy here in America, when it started, only white male landowners were citizens and could vote. So we have made progress. It's not perfect, but we have stuck with the system, but it takes a lot of commitment to try this system called democracy. And Egypt tried for a year. I mean, come on. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah, and can I just say, it's a pleasure to have two women you guys are allowed to think and do all that stuff, and with your boobs and all that good stuff.